Welcome to the Be About Being Better podcast, where we help people make evidence-based, sustainable, small changes for their health that compound into huge shifts towards a better, more vibrant life. I'm your host, Abby Stacey, a health and life coach, future registered dietitian, a master's graduate from Columbia University, and a certified intuitive eating counselor. And I believe that we can't make lasting or meaningful change single-handedly. So I'm so happy that you're here so that together you can see that a diet-free, sustainable lifestyle is possible, and you can leverage that to live a better life. And remember my disclaimer, this podcast is meant to give you general information and is not meant to substitute or replace medical advice, a diagnosis, or service treatment. Hello. Welcome back to the Be About Being Better podcast. Y'all, we got a big episode today. We got a heavy episode today. So I want to start with some trigger warnings. This episode will mention eating disorders. There's a brief mention of suicide. We talk about mortality, but this is a really important episode to listen to. And stay with me here, even with these trigger warnings, because this is an episode even before I started the Be About Being Better podcast. I knew that I was going to bring these guests on. I was going to bring on Linda+Jack Mazur. So I completed my master's degree at Columbia, and we had to take an eating disorder class. And as part of our curriculum, we read Linda+Jack's book called Emilee, The Story of a Girl and Her Family Hijacked by Anorexia. And I was so inspired by their story when they came to guest speak to us. It was really emotional to hear from two parents that their daughter passed away from an eating disorder. It was so impactful to me. They are just such great people. They did everything they could. The system truly failed them time and time again. I knew from that moment I was going to have them on as guests at some point for the podcast. And y'all, today is the day. This interview is absolutely amazing. After everything that Linda+Jack have been through and what they have witnessed, they just have the best attitudes. They just want to help people. They want to resource you. They want to provide you with community. They want to tell their story. They want Emilee's story to be amplified so that it happens to less and less people. You'll hear some pretty wild statistics in this episode, and one that really surprised me that I forgot about. I've heard this before, but to be reminded of it, every 52 seconds, someone dies of an eating disorder. And I think it's confusing to us. What? From an eating disorder? Yeah, from an eating disorder. People don't realize the seriousness of eating disorders sometimes. And I think people downplay it. And there's a lot of misconceptions. So in this episode, we dive into what are some of those misconceptions? What are some of the warning signs? What can you do? What are the different levels of care? And why do we struggle with access to these different levels of care to help people? Why are people dying of anorexia? So that's what this episode dives into. And please check out the show notes, buy their book. As we dive into some things, but we don't want to give the whole story away. And their book dives into way more detail about their daughter Emilee's story and everything that they've endured. So thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this episode. I think out of all the episodes that we've ever done, and honestly probably will do, this is probably one of the most important episodes that we could record. And I just appreciate you all sharing this episode, getting the word out, because whether you have an eating disorder, had in recovery, you know somebody, that we got to get the word out so that more people can learn from Emilee, Linda+Jack's story, and that they can be connected with these resources. This couple, they're doing really good work, and more people need to be educated on eating disorders. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing. It really means a lot to me. Let's dive in. All right, y'all. Hello. I am so excited to welcome Linda+Jack Mazur. Thank you both so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you for asking us to be on, and we're honored to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this podcast interview even last summer when I was a teaching assistant at Columbia. So thank you both so much for agreeing to that and being so patient. I didn't even have my podcast started then, but I was like, I already know I'm going to want y'all as a guest whenever we start the podcast and start bringing guests on. So really, really appreciate it. Well, would you both mind just kind of telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're living now, and what's going on? Just give us a little bit of an introduction to y'all.
We started out as just a regular family living in Penfield, New York.
Still living in Penfield,
Penfield,
still in the same house. It's changed a lot, but we're in the same house we've been in for 44 years, 3 years, but it's changed a lot, but we're still here.
And Jack, tell them what you do.
Oh, I'm a pharmacist by trade, semi-retired, mostly retired by now, just working a couple days a week, but since 1976, I started as a pharmacist, and it's been a good career. Good career. Yeah.
And I'm a small business owner and a Reiki master, and we were blessed with two beautiful, wonderful children. The first one was Emilee, and then almost 3 years later came Matthew, and life went along as we thought that it would. And sadly, things began to happen that we would have never imagined. Just a regular family, good family, lots of love. And our daughter developed anorexia, and it changed everything.
Yeah. And I know that our audience heard a little bit about your story in the introduction. And I definitely encourage y'all, and I'll be repeating this throughout our whole interview. You got to get the book. You got to get all the details. We'll be giving you little, highlights and snippets throughout this interview today, but really all of the details of what has unfolded with the Mazurs is in their book. So definitely encourage that. But the first question that I want to ask y'all, because everything seemed great and kind of, normal family, normal upbringing. What do you think were some of the driving factors that led into Emilee's eating disorder?
Well, if you want to go all the way back, when she was really little, she had trouble sleeping. Okay. And she had some separation anxiety when she was away from me. Yeah. I worked at home, so that was understandable. And we talked to the pediatrician about it. And, your first time parents, and you're out, concerned about everything. Oh, she's fine. You work at home. She's just attached to you. But that was, a lot of kids go through that. But, she got into school, and she flourished in middle school and in high school. And she
actually,
it started in elementary school, though, really, with her and her friend Kelly.
Yeah.
Just really, she loved school. She loved achieving. But I think that anxiety that she had early on, I think it was always in there. And I think she just masked it. Okay. It wasn't obvious at all. Just that, she was happy. She was social. She was bright. We didn't really worry about Emilee. She was great.
No, I always tell people that when Emilee was 14, I said, well, we don't have to worry about Emilee. She's got it all together. She's like a little Linda, and she was wise and beyond her years, and
she had a great sense of humor, like her dad.
We when we do talks now, we show a video of Emilee as a baby and growing up and into high school, college, and beyond. And she was always smiling, always laughing, always happy, and that's who she was. She was somebody that her friends would come to ask for advice or tell their troubles to. And she was a great listener and a great advisor to them. So, she wasn't diagnosed until she was 25 with anorexia. So she was diagnosed late. Was it going on before that? During high school and everything? Nothing that we saw. Nothing. It was nothing.
No,
different.
Well, she developed a GI issue in high school, and
that was because I know she was having some reflux, but then she was going to have a surgery. But do you mind just kind of explaining that and how you think the GI issues related to her eating disorder?
When she was in high school, she played soccer, and then she decided that she would run track in between, to kind of stay in shape. She was always a healthy, normal weight. She was strong, athletic, musical, a lot of other things too. But when she started to do the track, she came to me and said, Ma, I get this burning feeling in my throat and food starts to come up sometimes.
Just little bits.
Just little bits of food.
Yeah.
So we took her to the pediatrician, and then he recommended that we go see a gastroenterologist, we did. And he told us that it was not at all unusual for people who run to develop GERD. So he gave her medication, which she took, which helped a little bit. But she, from that point on, she had to think about eating, okay? If she drank too much water, things would come back up again. Ice cream came back up almost immediately. After dinner, if we went for a walk, sometimes she would just have a mouthful of food that would come up that she would just have to spit out. So we knew about eating disorders. We weren't experts on eating disorders, but we knew the things to look for. But if she ate smaller, more frequent meals, she did better. And the medicine helped the burning. But she did have a little cup by her bedroom sometimes that when she was doing her homework, if something came up, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't hiding anything. It was just a little cup. And sometimes I thought we were pretty astute. So I don't really think that anything was going on then, but I think it was the beginning because she had to think about food. It wasn't normal that she could just eat like everybody else and then, not have ramifications from it. So.
Well, then there was the anxiety of that too, going to college and stuff and eating with other people and, worrying about that reflux.
Am I going to have a reaction? Am I not? Yeah, absolutely.
Reflux. Do I have to have a cup every time I, go to eat or, so that, that may have changed the amount of food that she ate at that point. And again, you can never tell by somebody's weight what's going on, but she was still, a normal, healthy looking, healthy weight person. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there other, so I know weight is a huge thing that people, even in larger bodies, they could have anorexia and people wouldn't know. As you now, I know in the beginning you weren't experts on eating disorders, but I really see both of you now as really experts and advocates for eating disorders now. What are some of the other misconceptions that come to mind for eating disorders?
That they're a choice. That's a huge misconception.
Yeah, that is a huge one. Yeah.
That men don't get eating disorders because they certainly do. Maybe not quite as frequently and sometimes for different reasons, but it's just not unusual for people to develop an eating disorder when they have depression, when they have an illness, something where they lose weight. And there's just a certain amount of the population that are more predisposed because of their personality traits, as you know, people who are more perfectionistic, kind of driven. And that describes a lot of athletes too, right? So I guess people don't realize that there's no eating disorders don't discriminate. They could happen to anybody in any social class, any sexual orientation, socioeconomic class.
And it's a big problem in the military. Men and women in the military. It's becoming a bigger problem. And you think, everybody that goes in the military has to get into shape. They have to, be muscular and get into shape. And I think then there's that tipping point where it goes over the edge, where it becomes not just getting into shape and staying in shape, but it becomes obsessive and it can tip into an eating disorder. And it happens very, very frequently and more frequently now than ever before. There was always the thought that, parents were to blame too, and that's been demythed. And they're finding that there's a lot of genetics involved. They're doing a lot of studies on genetics. It's the biopsychosocial, but there's now genetics that come into play. So.
Yeah, definitely. And you two did absolutely everything that you could for Emilee and to try and help her on her journey. And you were met with so much resistance. It's like every time, took a step forward, they're 5 inches back. Like the healthcare system was not helping y'all out. Could you speak to, not to give too much away from the book, but could you speak to some of the pivotal moments in Emilee's journey, and how you dealt with that?
I will go on to say that Emilee did have surgery for her reflux when she was in college, and it got much better. And
oh, good.
It was something we pushed for her to see a thoracic surgeon, and the gastroenterologist kept saying, "Oh, she'll be," but we were worried about her esophagus, and just so it was something that she had done, and she felt much better. So at that point, I think we said, "I'm sorry, it was her body. She was 21 or 22 years old. So she made the decision. We just wanted her to know the options that were out there. And she was very glad she did. When afterwards she said it just felt so good to eat like a normal person again. But then things changed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a parent, and your child is sick, you take them to a doctor and you think the doctor will know what to do to help your child, whatever the illness is.
Right.
I mean, you do that from the time they're a baby right through. So it was just so eye-opening to us. We're so naive that we didn't realize that the doctors or most clinicians don't get any training in medical school or nursing school or anything about eating disorders.
No.
I think there's only 10% of the schools in the country that offer any classes at all in it. And it's minimal, it's just a couple hours or something. So we, the system was there. It was the only system we had to use, and just never understood how, as time went on, as her symptoms got worse and that they never understood how to get to the root of the problem. They kept just treating and stabilizing her, but never ever trying to get to the root of the problem, the mental.
It turned into a full-fledged eating disorder. Emilee was in an accelerated pharmacy program, and she was in a long-distance relationship at that time too. And I think the stress of that, was a tipping point for her. Yeah. So just before she graduated from pharmacy school, that accelerated program is when we noticed that she had lost weight. So she wasn't really living with us before. She was, at school, but she came home and she was a little bit thinner. But then by that Christmas, she had lost a lot of weight, and we were concerned. And her boyfriend, her fiance at the time, was very concerned too. And so eventually, after a few years, she reached out for help herself.
But prior to that, she was seeing her PCP, who was very, very supportive. Not schooled in eating disorders, but very supportive, and she was seeing a therapist too. But when she was 29, she realized that this was getting worse. It was taking over her life, and she wasn't able to keep working, and she knew that this was going to get worse. So she researched a lot of treatment centers throughout the United States and went away for treatment, told everybody she was sick. She had anorexia, but she was going to go away and get better. And after being at the treatment center for 5 days, after gaining less than 2 pounds, the insurance company said she wasn't sick enough to stay for treatment. That tipping point was she was angry.
She ended up being there for 10 days because the treatment center tried to
fight to keep her there,
right?
Tried to fight with the
right, because just because you gain a couple pounds doesn't mean that
But basically,
everything's fixed. But to the insurance company,
they told her she wasn't sick enough. So can you imagine? You're a medical professional yourself. She's a doctor of pharmacy, and she told everyone, her friends and her colleagues, "I'm taking a leave of absence. I have anorexia nervosa, and I have to do this. I have to take care of myself." So they tell her she's not sick enough. The insurance company doesn't cover. There was outpatient here at that time. That was all that was here. They wouldn't cover that either. So she was riddled with shame, anxiety, embarrassment, and she threw herself right back into work and literally worked herself to the bone. And we were powerless. Anything we offered to try to get her to do this, she just went into she was really depressed and
Well,
mortified that this had happened. She threw herself back into work. That was a very pivotal moment. And she worked for 6 months until she couldn't work anymore. And, after that, it was very up and down. She did get well enough to go back to work here and there because she was wonderful about following up with her therapist and her physician.
Yeah. I think about adults like Emilee, and there's so many, that's why we call it the nonprofit, the Emilee Connection, because you're an Emilee Connection. Everybody we've met, is an Emilee Connection. And these adults have gone through high school and graduated and college and graduated and had a job and been successful and maybe got married, had a family. And then this disease just takes all that away. And the shame of that is, while all your friends are moving on through their life, you just disconnect from them. And that's what she did. And some of the friends disconnected from her too. So it's just
well, and she never got the appropriate level of care until it was too late.
And that's so hard to declare, hi, this is what I have, to be really honest and transparent with the people in your life. I need to take a step away to take care of myself. I think it's so hard for people to, number one, say, hi, I have anorexia nervosa, to say I have this diagnosis and to be aware of that. And then to say, I need help. It's so hard for people to accept help and to take the action steps to do that. So it's like, wow, like she really was taking ownership and the system just spat her back out.
I know. And we were so proud of her for doing that. And what happened after that, after that initial time when she went away, the ups and downs are absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, you have to read the book because, we said, I remember one day standing in the hospital and saying, looking at Linda, and I said, people wouldn't believe this. This is crazy.
We tried so hard.
If this was a movie, people wouldn't believe it. But Emilee wanted her story told. That's why we wrote the book. It was because she told a friend of hers that she wanted her story told. So that might help somebody else. It might help change the system. And so no one would suffer like she did. So that was the impetus to write the book. It took us 3.5 years to get it out, to write it and get it out there. There was a lot of tears, but there was a lot of laughs too, and
the good memories. And
looking at the pictures. And the book has some of Emilee's writings in it. We'd hope that she would recover and write a book herself, but she's got some writings in the book herself from her.
Oh, she was an amazing writer. She was good at everything. But, we look back and there's always things that you look back at and say, I wish I'd have done something different. And I said, there's a million things I would do just the same and dozens different. I don't know if it would have had a different outcome, but we learned so much along the way and have learned so much sense from people like Emilee, who are wonderful people. And the thing is that these are everybody who I've met, that we've met, they're wonderful, compassionate, bright, driven people. And the disease just robs them of their sense of self. And it's so hard for people to understand when things happen to the brain. There's so much more stigma when somebody has a mental illness. And what's interesting to me is there's a lot of people who've read the book who've struggled with other types of mental illness who said how much the book has helped them. And there's been a lot of people who said that the book was pivotal for them continuing to work on their recovery. So it's doing more than we ever imagined it would do. And it's very hard for us to have the story out there too, because there's people who are not going to understand. There's people who judge it, who will judge it.
And judge us.
But it's okay. I mean, it's for the greater good, if it can save one person or shift one person's thinking so that they have the drive to get better. And the thing that I would say that we've learned along the way is that, so we started a nonprofit called the Emilee Connection. And that was the last thing we did. The first thing we did was we put all our energy into the book. The second thing we did was we started a podcast called One Shitter Picking Up the Pieces. And it's about eating disorders and all mental health issues because they're so co-occurring so many times. And then we started the Emilee Connection just last year to provide the support we wish was here for Emilee and we wish was here for us.
It's for adults suffering, and then the families or the caregivers of the adults that are suffering. Because, one of the saddest things I've heard in some of our groups is that, and this is from both the adults that are suffering and their parents, have said, I wish I had cancer. If I had cancer, people would understand, be empathetic, and I get the treatment that I was supposed to get.
And one young man said, if I had a relapse, people would understand if the cancer kind of come back. Yeah. And then there's another young man that said, well,
and that it wasn't your fault.
Right.
I think so many people blame the patient for the eating disorder, but it's not a choice. Yeah. And I love that, the title of the book has hijacked in it, because you have no control and you truly are hijacked. Yeah. And people don't understand that. Yeah.
And what is the statistic about women from 15 to
ages 15 to 24? It's the highest rate of any illness.
3 times higher than any other cause of illness
for
women 15 to 24. And people don't take it seriously. So, you present with an eating disorder and you don't get treatment right away. You came in with a tumor. They pay pretty close attention to you no matter what insurance you had, right? Yeah. And people who lose the ability to work end up on Medicaid, and then that's another whole nightmare. And I know that things are a little bit better than they were when things began with Emilee, but we still have a long, long way to go. And I'm so proud of you, Abby, for sharing a little bit about your journey and for specializing in eating disorders. Yeah. I think that professionals in the field who are open about their own journey are so powerful. I so believe in that. And I so believe in the power of peer support and social connection, because if anybody is going to get well, it's not going to be somebody who's isolated, alone in their room for weeks and months and years at a time. It's going to be people who have other people who believe in them, and therapists that believe in them, and a dietitian that believes in them. And I think that takes a village. And I've heard that only 10% of people with substance use issues get eating disorder treatment. And I've heard it's pretty close to the same statistic. I think I've heard from 10 to 20% of people with eating disorders only get formal treatment, right? So we have to do better. We have to do better as a community, as a society, and for our medical professionals, just to be better trained so that they can handle. And just like anything, Jack always says, the sooner that you are diagnosed, the better the chance that you're going to get through this and be okay. And recovery is possible. And that's why we're doing everything we're doing, because we don't want anybody else to go through what Emilee went through. Or any family either.
The statistic that I tell when we're speaking at a school or even with friends and families, that every 52 minutes somebody's dying as a direct result of an eating disorder. So that's just it's a statistic. I always have a hard time with that word, but that's a person out there. That's a life out there. That's another family that's suffering the loss of a loved one. So we have to do so much better, and we have to get the insurance companies on board. They're the driving force of healthcare in this country, and we've got to get them on board for better treatment for eating disorders.
Yeah. 100%. Do y'all mind just going through and explaining the different types of eating disorder treatment and maybe how to get better access to those, or any changes you would like to see with insurance or the healthcare system to have better access to those?
So, there's hospitalization. That's, if somebody needs to be stabilized, that's where they go. And there's coverage for that. That Emilee's insurance paid for it over and over and over again. That revolving door of the emergency department and some hospital admissions, that was covered. After that, there's residential treatment. That's the next step down, residential. And there are many, 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 many throughout the country of residential treatment centers, wonderful people that are there to help the patients. But the insurance company gives limited coverage to those,
if any.
And it costs up to anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 a month for residential treatment, which is pretty much out of the realm of any normal family, or any family or any person being able to afford that. So, but then there's partial hospitalization where they go to a facility. We have a place in town here called the Healing Connection that is partial where they go there and they have meals and support throughout the day. Then they go back home to their families. And then there's intensive outpatient, which I always thought should be above.
I know it's confusing
because it says intensive outpatient. It should be, but that's when they're more stabilized and they're more normalized with their eating and don't need that daily support for treatment. So a lot of that is covered.
Sometimes
limited
if you have the right insurance.
If you have the right insurance. The eating disorders were added to the Mental Health Parity Act from 2008, which didn't have eating disorders in it. But the Anna Weston Act in 2016, right before Obama left office in 2016, was added to the Mental Health Parity Act to include eating disorders that had to be treated just like any other mental illness. So everybody thought that's great, but it hasn't really made that much of a difference because the insurance companies, again, aren't nobody oversees them or takes them to task saying, so.
Most insurance companies do not pay for residential care.
Right.
And maybe not everybody needs residential care to begin with, okay? But they need to be properly assessed and they need therapy and they need a dietitian. Dietitians aren't even mandatory for people eating disorders. Why don't you speak to that?
This is so wild to me. Yeah, it is so wild. And one thing that we're taught, I'm in my dietetic internship right now, and one thing they're really harping in us is motivational interviewing and working with the patient or the client to develop goals. And when I had my inpatient eating disorder rotation recently, there's none of that. And when you're inpatient, it's just, you need to eat food or you will pass away. We are just at such a critical point and we need to be telling you what to do. So it's a hard balance when they're at that point. And I think possibly in more of an outpatient setting, there is an opportunity to even build more rapport with that patient and actually do more counseling, make it more collaborative and not focus so much on getting your body physically back to a baseline. And we just need to have you eat food, but also how do we help you change your mind and your relationship with food, heal that food anxiety, heal other things that are going on, help to make peace with food and to actually enjoy the experience of eating again, so that there is less of a likelihood to relapse. So that's why I became an intuitive eating counselor. And I know that when you're possibly in an inpatient setting or you are very much in the thick of anorexia nervosa, you are so out of touch with your hunger cues. You're not able to trust that. But eventually, when you start to recover, you do get your hunger cues back. And I think that's when intuitive eating and really working with the client and the patient on, how can we build these, goals together? Let's make your treatment collaborative. I'm not telling you what to do, but we're working together through this. I just think that there's such an opportunity for that. And a lot of people are missing it because they're just focusing on how physically can we get you back to a baseline? How can we just get you to eat more calories and gain weight? And obviously the patients are very resistant to that. They have such a fear of that because they're also not treating the mind and they're not empathizing with the patient. So I think that there's a lot of relapses because they're not looking at the patient from that holistic view and helping them to heal that relationship with food, get to the root of it.
Right, because people develop an eating disorder because they can't regulate their emotions, right? And food becomes the perfect coping mechanism, either for binge eating disorder, which is the most common eating disorder, all the way right through to anorexia. There's so many different types of eating disorders. They all manifest in different ways. One size does not fit all, and one size treatment does not fit all either. And people don't realize what an essential part of the team your dietitian is, because I've heard so many people say that the dietitian that they worked with was the reason that they got through it, because it's motivational interviewing. It's setting goals. It's being realistic. Well, okay, that didn't work. but let's just see what part of that might have worked a little bit that we can focus on more. And, just being open like that, because people need to be heard and understood, and they need the compassion.
Meetings with us might not be covered by insurance. Even like we're at the hospitals, but sometimes we're not with a practice, or therapists don't have somebody that they can refer to. So sometimes it's unless you have diabetes or like renal disease or renal failure, like those are the two things that for sure insurance will cover a dietitian visit with, but everything else is such a gamble.
Well, when I've been looking up a lot of the insurance companies and their hierarchy, and there's always a medical director, in charge of whatever the insurance is. And then they have cardiology specialists and endocrinologist specialists and different specialists for different disease states. But none of them have anybody on there who's a specialist for an eating disorder. So the people making these decisions at a 1-800 number have no education or specialization in eating disorders. And as a pharmacist, medication is important, but we're a pill for every ill society. And just give me something. And it works for hypertension and thyroid disease and stuff. But there's other changes that have to be made if you have hypertension with diet and exercise and other things. Just throwing a pill down your throat and a glass of water doesn't fix you immediately. So we're sitting in on a psychology and a psychiatry class in a couple of weeks, and we've done that every year, usually virtually since COVID. But I always ask them, somebody in this age of specialization, somebody specialize in eating disorders, because it's so much needed. It's exploding. It was there before COVID. It was exploding before COVID, and COVID just exacerbated it even more. And so I understand it's hard to deal with these patients, but you can't just fix them. There's no drug out there that's been proven to cure eating disorders. They've tried the SSRIs and they don't work. So it's just, somebody said, well, how long does it take to recover from an eating disorder? Some people put a time frame on it, 3 to 5 years, 7 years, but there is, it's so individual.
And some people may be living in, recovery for the rest of their life. Some people may be fully recovered. It doesn't matter. The label doesn't matter, as long as you can live a rich, full life and be healthy, and be healthy enough to enjoy life and be productive. And I hate labels. I really hate labels. So you just work so you can live your best life, be as healthy as you can, to be there, to be present, and to just make the most of every day.
There's a woman from London who contacted us after she read the book, and she contacted us just let us know that we weren't at fault. There's nothing we could have done. But she said, and she's in her 50s and she's in her own recovery now. But she says that people think that recovery is running through fields and eating ice cream, and it's not a straight line, and everybody doesn't become a doctor or a lawyer. But she's in her own recovery, working with her dog in her apartment with a circle of friends
and she's very proud that she has a normal BMI.
Yeah.
And she should be. She should be.
Yeah. And I think what both of you have just spoken to is the reinforcement of the importance of community. We can't make lasting or meaningful change single-handedly. You need that support system to get you through, to get to recovery, and then be able to sustain that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of virtual groups now, which are great, because some people who would never go to an in-person group will sign up to go to a virtual group. But the in-person groups are wonderful too. And in the in-person groups, what speaks to my heart is when I see the parents connecting with each other, and then the adults with eating disorders just connecting with each other. It's that sense of community. It's like that sense of being able to just share whatever your frustration is and not feel judged. And it's, you talk about treating people mentally, physically, emotionally, and there needs to be a spiritual component too. And I think that's what happens just in these meetings. I mean, and it doesn't have to be any set way. For some people, yoga is very good, but sometimes just that connection itself can be spiritual, and just the boost you need, and other people that you can reach out to if you're having a bad day. And, we're human by design. We don't do everything perfectly all the time. It's just that self-compassion is so important too.
We started out with these groups and doing one group for the adults and one group for the family a month, because both of us are still working and there's a lot of other things on our plate. Mm-hmm. But now we've been asked by the adult group, they'd like to do it weekly, and we just can't do it weekly. We're gonna try to do it twice a month now. So that gives me that gratification that, they're small groups. It's hard to get people to come out, but the
people
that we have are just so grateful and just so willing to help each other. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. So you host those virtual groups?
No, we do in-person groups.
These are in-person.
We're doing a limited series of virtual ones. I just finished one with Betsy Brenner, who has also written a wonderful book called The Longest Match, Rallying to Defeat an Eating Disorder in Midlife. She's part of our board too. So she's wonderful. And her husband helped us form our nonprofit. So that was wonderful too. And all these Emilee connections that we never imagined have come. Yeah. They live in Rhode Island. So, but anyway, we started a 5-week limited series virtual group that just ended. And we will be doing that again. And Jack and I are going to do the same thing for a family member support and just do a limited series, for 5 weeks. And that gives people some flexibility if they want to just focus for a while, because a lot of times people attend a lot of different groups. They need a lot of different support. We can focus on certain things, and we will be doing each of these a few times a year, the virtual groups. And the in-person groups are the ones that are here that we do every month.
And we want to do outings too, to have activities outside the groups so that it's, gives them something to look forward to.
Yeah. So not everything has to always be about eating disorders. It can just be about being people and having fun too. So
being together.
We're going to the zoo. We're doing a painting thing. We've got other things lined up.
And we're just, we don't talk clinically in these groups. We're just peer support. And it's just each of the person that give each other peer support. So.
But we're going to have speakers and things sometimes too for that clinical support that's so important too.
We launched the Emilee Connection last July, and it's been amazing the amount of support we've gotten from family, friends, and again, people we don't know. So it's given us the opportunity to do what we're doing, and we'd like to get bigger. And so.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the best way for listeners to get involved and support you? Because we have, listeners that do have eating disorders or are now in recovery. We also have listeners that have never had that, but they definitely will want to support your cause and support your nonprofit.
We are so fortunate that we have a blog now too, and there's some great things in it. It's relatively new, but we encourage the people in our support groups to contribute to the blog. And we have one young man who's a journalist who has some incredible, fabulous posts about recovery and his walk, and he's great. So the name of the website is the EmileeConnection.com, and it's spelled Emilee, Emilee connection.com. The blogs are there, and all the information about
the book,
our book,
the podcast, everything's on that website.
And what the book has helped us realize is that I think everybody thinks that this is a problem just here in the States, but the world is small because of social media. And we have people that have reached out to us from London and Australia,
New Zealand,
and it's
a woman
same frustrations that they're going through all different places. And
there's a woman from Slovakia that contacted Linda.
So in addition to still working part-time and doing this, I have a lot of email time that I spend with people and phone calls. And that all started, not long after Emilee passed, people started reaching out to me. And that kind of surprised me because, our scenario was the worst scenario. But I think what happens is that people realize there really isn't anything that they couldn't tell us that we wouldn't have empathy for and compassion for and understand. Yeah. And we tried to learn everything we could along the way with Emilee, and we've learned even more since. And it's so wonderful just to be able to share it and to do it from the heart. It keeps us going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much for sharing your story, having this courage, and to have to repeat your story so many times. I mean, seriously, God bless you both, and thank you so much, because you really are creating waves and making a lot of change and
Wow.
planting a lot of seeds, which is important.
Look who's talking.
Yeah, right back at you. Yeah.
Oh, I love y'all so much. Thank you. As we close out, any other, because you've learned so much along the way, anything, else, any other, like little nuggets of wisdom or pieces of advice that you would have to people that are struggling with eating disorders, that may be a listener right now, or maybe parents that are struggling with a child that is suffering from an eating disorder?
I think language is very important, and having the right kind of supports. And I think that people who are struggling with an eating disorder, there are often people who are very compassionate and caring with other people, but not so much with themselves, and they're sensitive, they're easily hurt. So I think it's very important for them to tell people what they need. And maybe when something didn't set right, something somebody said, a friend, a family member, I think that's a really important thing. And I think it's certainly the peer support for family members too, because not one size fits all. And it's great to hear different scenarios, different stories, and different things that work for other people, for adults and for their loved ones, for sure.
I just recently spoke at a high school, and then Linda and I spoke at a college just the other day. And the high school was with the faculty, their nurses, coaches, teachers, and stuff. And I always tell people that, when you see someone who's been happy, engaging with activities socially and everything, then something all of a sudden, they're not the same person. I remember Emilee in high school. She had a friend who was on the soccer team and stuff, and she noticed she wasn't happy, and she had her head down on the desk, and
She lost a lot of weight.
She lost a lot of weight. She wasn't eating lunch, and she went to the guidance counselor there, and with her concerns about this other person, and she got help, and she is recovered and now a doctor here in Rochester. So I just tell these people, don't be afraid to go up to someone and say, hey, is everything okay? Is there anything you want to tell me or talk about? Because
and everybody knows someone with
every place we've gone through, all our advocacy,
all the talks we've done
in Rochester, Albany, Washington, everybody knows somebody. That class at the high school, or the talk at the high school with the teachers and coaches and stuff. We asked people to raise their hand if they knew somebody with an eating disorder, and there was 60 people in the room, and there was at least 50 hands that went up. It was just everybody knows somebody. And for the people that have eating disorders out there, or any mental illness, please reach out to someone. Please, you're not alone. You're not alone.
And through schools, counselors, the lunch ladies, teachers, everybody. Schools are so busy right now, and people are so taxed, but just pay attention to those food habits and things you see in your students, because they spend more time during school year at school than they do at home.
By the time they get home, if they go to school at 7 in the morning, and then they go to school, and then they've got activities afterwards, and then they get home at 7 at night or 8 at night, parents
go to bed.
Parents haven't seen them all day. Dinner time's over, and so this connection in the schools, and like I said at the college, I said trauma is very subjective, because a lot of people say this is brought on by trauma too, but the trauma of being away from home for the first time, and leaving your friends behind, and not being home where mom is making you dinner every day and stuff, and so now you're out on your own, and you've got to learn to eat on your own. And so if you have a problem with eating, it gets even worse when you're out by yourself. And so
any transition in life,
it's a transition.
Any transition in life can be a factor. So nothing to be ashamed of. And if there's any inkling that something might be wrong, you don't want to live with regrets. So just follow it through and do everything you can and get all the support you can. And get a great dietitian.
Yes. Oh my gosh, for sure, for sure. Because you need someone that's for those long-term follow-ups and
Absolutely.
to help you with the eating behaviors as well.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you both so much. I am just sending you so much love, and I'm so grateful that you've come on the Be About Being Better podcast to share your story. And we're going to link everything up in the show notes. So y'all head to the show notes. We're going to have the Emilee Connection website there. We're going to link up the blog, their podcast, the book for sure, and then, a couple other things too. So, and if anyone wanted to get in touch with you both, what is the best way to do that? If they have, testimony or story or another question for you both.
They can do it through the website, or they can contact us at Linda, Linda.John.Mazur is Mazur @gmail.com, or through the website, it's info@theemileeconnection.com. And again, Emilee is spelled Emilee.
Amazing. Thank you. And we'll have that linked up in the show notes too. Thank you both
Thank
so
you,
much.
Abby.
I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Hey y'all, thanks again for listening to the Be About Being Better podcast. I so appreciate you. If this episode made you laugh, smile, think about yourself or your life differently, in any way making your life better, I empower you to share the show with 3 people who, just like you, need to hear this message and have this type of transformation in their lives. I personally read all the reviews of the show and see the Instagram story shares, and it honestly gives me so much joy to see that our mission is making people's lives better. And the reviews really do help in increasing our impact. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. If you need personalized support with anything discussed in today's episode or need help creating a sustainable, diet-free lifestyle, take my quiz. It's linked below in the show notes, and that quiz will help you see which one of our coaching programs is right for you. Thank you so much again for listening, and here's to being about being better.